Welcome back, everyone. Today, we'll be taking a deep dive into, well, something pretty chilling.
Literally chilling.
Yeah, literally. We're going to be talking about Project Iceworm,
Ooh.
a secret Cold War project involving, get this, a hidden city and nuclear missile launch sites
Under the ice.
under the Greenland ice sheet.
That's right.
So for this deep dive, we've got some declassified documents about Project Iceworm. Sounds some real spy novel stuff, doesn't it?
It does. And the reality's just as fascinating, believe me.
So to kick things off, can you set the scene for us? What was going on in the world that led to this, well, pretty audacious project?
Okay, so picture this. It's the early 1960s.
Okay. Cold War.
Cold War. U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Right.
Locked in a nuclear arms race.
Yeah.
Everyone's on edge. Everyone's trying to, get that strategic advantage.
One-upmanship at its finest.
Exactly.
So how did Greenland fit into all of this?
Well, the U.S. military, they looked at this massive, desolate Greenland ice sheet and thought, perfect hiding place.
They'll never find us there.
Right, like who would suspect nuclear missile sites under miles of ice?
Talk about a surprise attack.
Yeah.
But building something like that under the ice? I mean, come on, how?
It was a huge challenge. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they were the ones tasked with this monumental project. And they didn't just want launch sites, they wanted a whole subterranean city.
Wait, hold on. A city, like a whole city under the ice.
Yeah, Camp Century, they called it.
Camp Century. That's, wow. So how do you even begin to build a city under the ice?
They dug tunnels and chambers right into the ice sheet, used a technique called cut and cover. So basically, dig a trench, cover it with steel arches, pack snow on top, boom, tunnel.
Wow, that's incredible.
And to power the whole thing, they brought in a portable nuclear reactor.
A nuclear reactor under the ice. I don't even know what to say. What was it like living there? In Camp Century, I mean.
It was a different world for sure. Scientists, engineers, military personnel, all living and working together in this, incredibly isolated and extreme environment.
That was rough.
It was tough, no doubt. But they made it work. They had living quarters, labs, mess hall, even a library and a barbershop.
A barbershop. Seriously.
Yep. Tried to make it feel, as normal as possible, I guess.
I can see that. Well, I got to imagine it couldn't have all been smooth sailing, right? Living under the ice, there's got to be some downsides.
You'd be right about that. Turns out the Greenland ice sheet, well, it's not exactly stable.
Always shifting and moving.
Exactly. And all that movement caused a ton of problems in the tunnels structurally.
So the ice, the very thing they were trying to use to their advantage, became their biggest problem. That's kind of ironic, isn't it?
You could say that. And then you've got the Arctic climate on top of everything else. Transportation was a nightmare. Communication was spotty. Just maintaining the base was a constant battle.
It sounds like they were fighting a losing battle, really.
In the end, they were. Project Iceworm just wasn't sustainable.
So what happened? They just packed up and left this secret city.
Pretty much. By 1966, they decided to abandon Camp Century. The shifting ice just slowly swallowed it up.
Wow, that's kind of wild. A top secret city under the ice and then gone, like it never even existed.
And the wildest part, the true nature of Project Iceworm, it stayed a secret for decades. It wasn't until the 1990s that declassified documents revealed the whole story.
A real hidden chapter of Cold War history. Makes you wonder what else is still out there. Hidden away, just waiting to be discovered.
Definitely does.
And that's just the beginning. There's another layer to this story, one that's particularly relevant today. But we'll say that for after the break.
It's funny, isn't it? Project Iceworm failed, but it shows how people always want to do these big things.
Yeah.
But they don't always think about nature or global politics.
It's like we keep trying to control the world, but sometimes it fights back.
Right. And during the Cold War, a lot of people just saw the Arctic as this empty space that they could use.
A blank slate.
Yeah. But it's not empty at all. It's got a really delicate ecosystem.
And it's got people living there, too.
Exactly. And now with the ice melting, because of climate change, we can see what happens when you just try to exploit a place like that.
Yeah, all that stuff they left behind at Camp Century, the hazardous materials.
Including maybe even nuclear waste.
It's like a reminder that what we do today can affect people for generations.
It really does. We need to think about the future and not just what we want right now.
Especially when it comes to the Arctic.
It's like we're finally realizing how much damage was done during the Cold War.
And the damage wasn't just to the environment, but also to the people who live there, the indigenous communities.
Absolutely. And now the Arctic is becoming more accessible because of the melting ice.
So it's even more important to make sure that we're developing it responsibly.
We have to think about everyone who's affected, not just the people who want to make money or gain some strategic advantage.
I think Project Iceworm can teach us a lot about what not to do,
It's a story about hubris, about not thinking about the consequences.
about not respecting nature.
Yeah, and it's a story that's still going on, you know? We're still dealing with climate change, and the Arctic is becoming really important geopolitically.
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about a new Cold War
Hmm.
between the West and the East.
Exactly. And even though the players are different and the situation is different, there are a lot of similarities to what was happening during Project Iceworm.
Competition for resources, military buildup,
The strategic importance of the Arctic.
it's all happening again.
So Project Iceworm isn't just a weird story from the past.
Right.
It's about a way of thinking about power and security that hasn't really gone away.
And it makes you wonder, are we going to repeat the same mistakes?
Yeah. Are we really learning from history, or are we just going to do the same things over and over again?
These are questions that everyone needs to think about because what happens in the Arctic affects everyone.
It really does. It affects the whole planet.
You know, what happened with Project Iceworm, under the ice, hidden from view, it reminds me of so many problems we have today.
Like if we ignore them, they'll just go away.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to be more aware of what's happening in the Arctic, and we need to be more transparent about it.
And we need to hold people accountable for what they're doing there.
Instead of thinking of the Arctic as a place where countries are fighting for control,
Right.
we need to think of it as a shared responsibility.
A place where we need to work together to protect the environment and the people who live there.
Exactly. The future of the Arctic depends on whether we can move past those old ideas of competition and control.
And start working together for the benefit of everyone.
Absolutely.
That's a future I can get behind.
Me too.
It's time to learn from the past and do things differently.
Yeah, and maybe by studying projects like Iceworm, seeing how ambitious they were, but also how they failed.
Maybe that's how we figure out how to move forward.
You're right. It's not about blaming people for the past.
Right.
It's about understanding what happened and using that knowledge to make better choices.
Because history is full of lessons that we can learn from.
Yeah, and Project Iceworm is a really good example of that.
It's amazing, right? This one project, Iceworm,
Yeah.
it was buried for so long. Literally and figuratively. And now it's giving us all these ways to think about the problems we have today.
It shows that the past isn't really over. You know, what happened during the Cold War is still affecting us. The ice is melting and the world is, well,
Yeah, it's a different place.
it's a different place, but some things are the same.
Do you think the people who worked on Iceworm ever thought about what might happen later on, like way later?
That's a good question. It's hard to know. But remember, back then it was the Cold War.
Right.
The threat of nuclear war was very real, and the Arctic was a very important place strategically.
So maybe they were just focused on that and those immediate threats,
Mm.
and they didn't really see the big picture.
Yeah, maybe. But it shows how important it is to think about the long term.
Yeah, not just about what we want right now, but what the consequences might be later on.
Exactly.
And that's something we need to do with all sorts of problems, not just the Arctic, right? Like climate change.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And technology.
Technology,
Yeah.
How it's changing so fast. And global security, too.
We have to think about the ripple effects of our decisions. Everything is connected.
So as we finish up this deep dive into Project Iceworm,
Yeah.
what's the one thing we want people to remember?
I think the biggest thing is that history can teach us a lot. We can learn from what happened with Project Iceworm, even though it happened a long time ago, and it seems like a really specific thing.
Yeah, it's not just some weird story from the past. It's got these lessons that are still relevant today.
Exactly. It reminds us that our actions have consequences, sometimes consequences we don't even think about.
And that we need to be really careful about the choices we make, not just us individually, but as a whole society.
You can learn from history, you know?
Yeah.
We can change how we think about things and use what we learn to make a better future.
That's a good point. We're not stuck with the past. We can use it to move forward. So listeners, we want you to think about Project Iceworm. Think about the choices those people made back then, and think about how those choices are affecting us today. And ask yourselves, what choices are we making now that might have consequences we haven't even thought about?
And if you want to learn more about all this, about history and science and geopolitics, check out insiderrelease.com. They have a ton of information on all sorts of interesting stuff.
Keep exploring and keep questioning and keep learning. There's a whole world of hidden stories and important lessons out there just waiting for you to discover them.